I am Anna Müller, a 32-year-old mother living in the shadow of a war that has consumed our city. Before the conflict reached our streets, I worked as a nurse in the local hospital, tending to the sick and injured, my hands steady and my heart full of purpose. Life was simple yet fragile. A delicate balance of caring for my 5-year-old son, Lukas, and keeping our small home running while honoring the memory of my late husband, who died in a tragic accident before the storm of war swept across our lives. Every day I strive to be strong for Lukas. His laughter is my anchor, a fragile thread that keeps me grounded amidst the chaos looming on the horizon. I am not a soldier. I do not wear a uniform, nor do I hold a weapon. Yet I am drawn into this conflict not by duty to a flag or a nation, but by the primal instinct to protect my child. The streets I once walked freely now echo with the distant rumbles of artillery, and the hospital corridors are filled not with hope, but with the cries of the wounded. I have learned to be resourceful. My skills as a nurse have become tools of survival, teaching me how to stretch meager supplies, tend to the ill with what little we have, and remain calm when fear threatens to consume me. Every day presents a choice to despair or to endure, to cling to the fragments of a normal life, or to prepare for the uncertainty that comes with each passing night. In my heart, I carry a quiet determination. The war may rage around us, tearing apart neighborhoods and shattering lives, but as long as Lukas is by my side, I will navigate whatever horrors lie ahead. I will find a way to survive and to keep him alive no matter the cost. My life has always been shaped by loss and resilience. After the death of my husband, I became both mother and father to Lukas, carrying the weight of responsibility on my own. My parents had passed years before leaving me with no extended family nearby, and the small apartment we shared became both home and sanctuary against a world growing ever more uncertain. Despite the hardships, I tried to create a sense of normalcy for Lukas. Mornings were filled with laughter as I prepared whatever little breakfast we could find, and evenings with stories and lullabies painting for him a world far from the shadows of war. I wanted him to believe, even if only for a few hours, that life could still hold warmth and safety. The streets of our neighborhood were once familiar and welcoming, filled with neighbors who shared news and laughter. Now they echo with the sounds of fear, distant explosions, hurried footsteps, and the occasional cry of a child waking to sirens. Every memory of peace feels like a fragile thread, and I cling to them, drawing strength from the life I once knew. For Lukas, for our past, and for whatever future might remain, I have vowed never to surrender, no matter what the war demands of us. Stalingrad, once a bustling industrial hub on the banks of the Volga, had transformed into a city on edge by the summer of 1942. The war had crept closer and closer, each news report carrying the weight of fear and uncertainty. Rumors of battles, bombings, and casualties filtered through the narrow streets carried by neighbors, traders, and the occasional soldier passing through. It was a city caught between its ordinary daily life and the extraordinary demands of a world at war. Before the siege fully took hold, our lives were a delicate balance between survival and normalcy. Markets were crowded, yet empty shelves that once overflowed with goods now held only scraps. Families whispered about rationing, and neighbors helped each other stretch their limited supplies. Yet, despite the tension, there remained a pulse of human resilience. Children played quietly in the alleys, workers moved along their routines, and I carried out my duties at the hospital, tending to both the sick and the anxious alike. The social fabric was under strain. Neighbors who once shared laughter now spoke in hushed tones, fearful of German patrols and the threat of sudden violence. Air raid sirens could sound at any moment, cutting conversations short and sending families into the basements that had become temporary shelters. Fear and courage coexisted in every home, and every street corner held a quiet reminder of the city's precarious position on the front lines. Amidst all this, I found myself navigating a strange duality: the desire to protect my son and maintain some semblance of normal life, and the stark awareness that the war could intrude at any moment. Each morning, I stepped outside, the smoke rising in the distance and the echoes of distant artillery reminding me of the danger I carried with me, both hope and dread. It was a city on the brink, and I knew that the days to come would test not only the survival of Stalingrad, but the endurance of every mother trying to keep her child safe. I never chose this war. I did not enlist, and I do not carry a weapon. Yet, the conflict has become an inseparable part of my life. It swept into our city like a relentless storm, and in its wake, ordinary people like me were forced to confront horrors we had never imagined. For me, the war is not about politics or strategy. It is about survival, about protecting Lukas from a world that has grown perilous overnight. Every decision I make is guided by a single, unwavering purpose: to keep him alive. The streets may crumble under bombs, the supply lines may falter, and the nights may stretch long with sirens and distant gunfire, but I cannot surrender. I am drawn into this conflict not by duty to a nation, but by a primal, unyielding instinct to shield my child. Even now, I feel the tension tighten around my chest each time I hear the distant rumble of artillery or glimpse the fear in my neighbor's eyes. The war surrounds us, pressing in from every direction, and I understand that it will shape our lives in ways that are unimaginable. Yet in this chaos, my determination burns brighter. As long as Lukas is by my side, I will endure, I will adapt, and I will fight to preserve the fragile thread of our existence. The days ahead promise no respite. I know the city will not remain untouched for long. Supplies are dwindling, and each trip outside risks encountering soldiers, snipers, or stray artillery shells. Water is rationed, food is scarce, and the air itself seems heavy with the threat of disease and starvation. Every decision carries weight, and every choice could mean life or death for Lukas and me. I find myself constantly scanning the streets from our small apartment window, listening for the distant rumble of engines, the echo of marching boots, the whine of shells overhead. Each sound is a reminder that danger lurks everywhere. Even within the walls of our home, safety is an illusion. Yet amidst this fear, a quiet resolve grows. I know that the coming days will demand ingenuity, courage, and endurance beyond anything I have known. For Lukas, I must face whatever horrors lie ahead. For him, I will navigate the chaos, find hidden paths to survival, and cling to hope even as the city around us begins to crumble. The first signs of the war's approach were subtle, at first distant rumbles that could have been thunder shadows of military vehicles on the horizon, and the sudden hushed conversations of neighbors who once laughed freely in the fall streets. Yet, as the days passed, the reality became undeniable. Stalingrad, my home, was no longer a place of ordinary life. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm to descend. Each morning, I peered through the cracked window of our small apartment, Lukas, clinging to my side, eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Smoke rose in the distance, carrying with it the scent of burning wood and rubble, and the distant rattle of artillery reminded me that no one was truly safe. The streets that had once been filled with vendors and children now felt like corridors of uncertainty, every shadow potentially hiding danger. People whispered about rationing, about shortages of bread and water, about the soldiers moving through the city like ghosts. The hospital where I worked grew tense, with every arriving patient, wounded civilians, frightened families, and those injured in minor skirmishes. The routines that had once brought comfort were replaced with a new order dictated by fear and necessity. For Lukas, I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, hiding my worry behind forced smiles and playful gestures. Yet I could see it in his eyes. He sensed that our world had shifted, that the city outside our walls had become a place of peril. And as I guided him through the narrow, smoke-laden streets in search of supplies, I realized the truth. I could not avoid the war was here, and we were already caught in its grip. Every decision, every step forward, carried risk. The city we had known was dissolving into uncertainty, and I knew that our survival depended on vigilance, courage, and an unyielding determination to protect my child no matter the cost. The days of relative calm quickly gave way to urgent preparation. I knew that waiting passively for help or for the war to pass was a luxury we could no longer afford. Our small apartment became both home and refuge, and I set about transforming it into a place where Lukas could survive even if the city outside became uninhabitable. I scavenged what little supplies remained, canned goods from a neighbor's abandoned pantry, bottles of water, carefully rationed, and scraps of cloth that could serve as blankets or makeshift bandages. Each item had to be accounted for, each drop of water measured, each crumb of bread portioned with precision. My skills as a nurse guided these efforts, teaching me how to stretch resources, preserve what was perishable, and prepare for injuries or illness that might strike without warning. Every night, I listened to the distant hum of artillery and the occasional rumble of tanks plotting possible escape routes should we need to move. Lukas, unaware of the full extent of danger, asked countless questions about the noises that echoed through the city. I spoke to him, gently crafting stories of faraway lands and brave explorers masking the terror with imagination. His small hand in mine reminded me why I had to be vigilant, why I could not falter. I also began establishing a rhythm to our days, rising early to check on provisions, tending to our meager garden of potted vegetables by the window, and reinforcing our apartment with anything that could shield us from shrapnel or debris. Each action was a test of endurance, patience, and ingenuity. I learned to move silently through the halls to anticipate danger before it arrived, and to keep Lukas close yet curious, teaching him caution without extinguishing his spirit. In these first weeks of siege, I discovered that survival was not just about hiding from bombs. It was about adapting, thinking ahead, and maintaining hope. Every careful preparation, every measured step became a small act of defiance against the chaos outside. I resolved that come what may we would endure together. The reality of loss crept into our lives in small, piercing ways. Neighbors who had once shared meals and laughter began to disappear, some evacuated by the authorities, others taken by the war in ways too grim to speak aloud. Each empty apartment, each silent street corner was a reminder that safety was fleeting. At the hospital, colleagues I had known for years were reassigned or forced to flee. The faces that had once offered comfort now bore fear and exhaustion. I watched as a fellow nurse, young and brave, was taken away after being caught in a stray bombing. The loss shook me deeply, but I could not allow grief to paralyze me, not with Lukas depending on me. One afternoon, a neighbor delivered news of a distant relative killed in a skirmish near the outskirts of the city. Lukas asked why the man would not come home, and I struggled to explain, fumbling for words that would soothe without revealing the harsh truth. The sorrow settled heavily in my chest, a weight I could not share fully with anyone. Through these moments, I realized the depth of isolation that the siege imposed. Our apartment became a fragile island amidst a city unraveling under bombardment and fear. Every knock at the door, every distant shout reminded me of the fragility of life. And yet, amidst this sorrow, a determination grew stronger. I could not allow despair to take root. For Lukas, for the memory of those lost, and for the hope that life could continue, I had to remain steadfast. Each loss hardened my resolve, teaching me that survival in this city demanded not only vigilance and skill, but an unyielding spirit in the face of relentless grief. The first real test of our survival came on a morning that began like any other yet ended in chaos. Supplies were dangerously low, and I knew I had to venture out into the streets to find food and water. Clutching Lukas's hand tightly, I guided him through alleys littered with debris, keeping our heads low and our movements quiet. Every step felt like a gamble. An unseen sniper, a stray shell, or an unexpected patrol could end our lives in an instant. We moved from building to building, scavenging what we could from abandoned shops and the remnants of shattered markets. A tin of beans here, a bottle of water there, each small find was a victory, a reprieve from the gnawing hunger that shadowed our days. Lukas asked questions about the empty streets, about why no one played outside, and I answered with as much honesty as I could, weaving explanations that would not terrify him yet, conveyed the seriousness of our situation. At one point, we heard shouting nearby, a group of soldiers arguing over something in a ruined store. Instinctively, I pressed Lukas against a wall, holding my breath as they passed mere feet away. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment, fear threatened to paralyze me. But the sight of Lukas's trusting eyes steeled my resolve. I reminded myself that panic would accomplish nothing. Only careful planning and steady courage would keep us alive. By midday, we had managed to gather a modest amount of food, enough to see us through the next day. Yet, the mission had taken its toll. Lukas was exhausted, and my muscles ached from carrying him at times to avoid danger. Returning home, I reinforced the door with wooden planks and double-checked our small cache of supplies, knowing that tomorrow would bring another test, and the day after that, yet another. In those first ventures, I learned the harsh truth: survival was not passive. It demanded vigilance, improvisation, and an unwavering commitment to protect my child. Each mission outside our apartment was a battle of strategy, courage, and hope, and it was clear that the war had only just begun. Life inside the city during bombardment was a constant symphony of fear. The walls of our apartment shook intermittently, carrying the echo of distant artillery and the occasional shattering crash of a nearby building. Smoke curled through the streets, painting the sky in hues of gray and orange, while the acrid smell of gunpowder and burning wood lingered in every breath. Lukas clung to me, his small body trembling with every distant explosion, and I held him tightly, whispering assurances I barely believed myself. Outside, the streets were littered with rubble, overturned carts, and the remnants of what had once been a bustling marketplace. Every corner held uncertainty, shattered windows, scorched door frames, and the occasional body huddled in shadow reminded me that death had become an omnipresent neighbor. The city's pulse was erratic, broken by sudden bursts of violence, yet human life endured. A mother carried her child across a street, a man dragged a wounded neighbor into a doorway, and even amidst the chaos, small acts of kindness flickered like candles in the dark. Inside our apartment, I learned to listen to the city's rhythm. The low rumble of tanks signaled movement nearby, while the sharp cracks of rifle fire indicated soldiers searching for supplies or perhaps for civilians caught in the crossfire. Each noise required interpretation, each shadow demanded caution. I created routines for Lukas, safe spots to crouch, signs to follow when an explosion occurred, and whispered games to distract him from the horror just outside the walls. Despite the constant danger, life persisted. People found ways to laugh quietly, to exchange scraps of food, and to maintain a fragile sense of community. But for Lukas and me, every day was a negotiation with fear. I had to keep him alive, keep him calm, and keep moving forward even when the city seemed determined to tear itself and us apart. Survival was no longer a choice. It was the only option. It happened on a gray morning when the city felt unusually, still a deceptive calm that made my stomach tighten. As Lukas and I ventured out to check our meager supplies, a sudden bombardment erupted nearby. The ground shook violently, sending shards of plaster and brick raining around us. I grabbed Lukas, pressing him close as we ducked behind the remnants of a collapsed wall, my heart hammering in sync with the distant explosions. The streets had transformed into a battlefield. Smoke and dust obscured vision, and the cries of terrified civilians pierced the air. I could see soldiers moving in the distance, their boots crunching over broken glass and rubble. Each step forward was calculated. Each decision could mean life or death. I whispered instructions to Lukas, teaching him to crouch low and to stay silent while my mind raced through escape routes and hiding places I had memorized. At one point, a shell exploded mere meters from our hiding spot. The blast threw debris into the air, and I shielded Lukas with my body, feeling the impact jolt us both. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if we would survive the chaos. But instinct and necessity drove me. I could not afford to falter. I guided him through narrow alleyways, avoiding open streets and scanning for any movement that signaled danger. When we finally reached the relative safety of our apartment, both of us trembling and covered in dust, I realized the enormity of what lay ahead. Survival required more than careful planning. It demanded courage under pressure, the ability to adapt instantly, and the relentless will to protect my child. That day, I understood that every trip outside, every decision to scavenge for supplies was a battle of its own. The war had become personal, an unyielding force testing our limits. Yet, amidst the fear and destruction, a spark of determination ignited within me. I had faced the first trial, and though battered and exhausted, I had emerged with Lukas safe by my side. This was only the beginning, and I knew that the days to come would challenge us in ways I could not yet imagine. As the first weeks of siege passed, I began to understand the true nature of the struggle we faced. Survival was not merely about finding food or avoiding stray bullets. It was a test of endurance, patience, and unwavering resolve. Each day presented a new challenge, and each night brought a gnawing uncertainty about what the next morning would hold. Watching Lukas sleep safely in our makeshift shelter, I reflected on how quickly life had changed. The city we once knew, filled with laughter markets and familiar faces, had transformed into a maze of rubble, fear, and constant vigilance. Yet amidst the destruction, I also recognized our resilience. The small victories of securing a tin of food, navigating through dangerous streets, and returning home, unharmed, reminded me that we could endure if only we remained careful and determined. I realized that the coming days would demand even more from both of us. There would be times when I would have to make impossible choices, when danger would seem insurmountable, and when hope might feel like a distant memory. But I also understood that surrender was not an option. Lukas depended on me, and my responsibility to him gave me strength beyond measure. The siege had just begun, and I knew that the trials ahead would push us to our limits. Yet, as I watched the first light of dawn filter through the smoke-filled windows, I resolved that no matter how harsh the world outside became, we would face it together. We would adapt, endure, and survive. And in that determination lay the fragile hope that life, however battered, could continue. The morning air was thick with a deceptive stillness when it began the first truly devastating barrage. The ground trembled beneath our feet as the distant roar of artillery grew louder, turning into a relentless drumbeat that seemed to shake the very walls of the city. I grabbed Lukas tightly, feeling his small body quake against mine, and instinctively pressed him to the floor, whispering reassurances that I barely believed myself. Windows shattered, sending jagged shards flying like deadly rain. Dust and smoke poured into the apartment, choking the narrow space with the scent of fire and gunpowder. Every heartbeat felt amplified, every distant thud a reminder that death could arrive at any moment. I could hear the cries of neighbors through the thin walls, children screaming, adults shouting, warnings, and the occasional groan of someone caught in the blast. I moved cautiously through the apartment, dragging Lukas behind me toward the reinforced corner we had designated as a temporary shelter. My mind raced through every possible danger, collapsing walls, falling debris, and the unpredictable trajectory of shells exploding nearby. I tried to remain calm to mask my terror so that Lukas would not sense it yet. The pounding in my chest made that nearly impossible. Once huddled behind the thickest wall, I held him close and counted each echoing explosion, measuring time by the violent rhythm of destruction. Smoke stung my eyes and filled my lungs, but I refused to let panic take hold. My hands shook as I applied the knowledge of my nursing training to our small refuge, covering openings with blankets to block the worst of the debris and keeping Lukas's head low. Minutes felt like hours, the world outside reduced to flashes of fire and the relentless roar of artillery. When the barrage finally eased, we emerged covered in dust, ears ringing but alive. The streets outside were unrecognizable, littered with rubble-shattered buildings and the remnants of lives torn apart. That day I understood the full weight of the war. It was not just a distant conflict, it was a force that could obliterate everything familiar in seconds. Yet, amidst the chaos, a quiet resolve took hold. I had kept Lukas safe, and I would continue to do so no matter the horrors that awaited us in the days to come. The aftermath of the bombardment left the streets silent in a way that was almost unnatural. Where there had once been chatter and the clatter of daily life, there was only rubble smoke and an eerie stillness broken occasionally by distant cries. As Lukas and I navigated through the debris-strewn alleys, I saw the first tangible signs of loss. The bodies of neighbors I had known for years, homes reduced to ruins and families scattered in panic. One of my colleagues from the hospital, a young nurse named Marta, had stayed behind to tend to the wounded when the shells fell. I later heard that she had been trapped beneath a collapsed roof, her screams echoing for hours before silence claimed her. The knowledge that someone so brave, so familiar, had perished in the chaos left a hollow ache in my chest. I felt a pang of survivor's guilt, wondering why I had been spared while others were not. Children, too, had not been spared. I saw small hands reaching from shattered doorways, faces streaked with dust, and tears calling for parents who would never return. Lukas's small hand tightened around mine, sensing the gravity of what surrounded us. I whispered to him, keeping my voice steady, masking my own grief so that he would not be consumed by fear. Yet, even as I spoke words of comfort, the images seared into my memory, the mangled remnants of what had been ordinary lives extinguished in moments. In the nights that followed, I found myself replaying faces, names, and the fleeting moments of kindness that now seemed irretrievably lost. Each loss hardened my resolve, teaching me that survival was not only about avoiding danger, but about enduring sorrow and remaining steadfast for Lukas. I understood with a clarity that was both painful and necessary that the war did not discriminate. It consumed everything in its path. And yet, amidst this sea of loss, I clung to one immutable truth. As long as Lukas remained by my side, I had a purpose or reason to navigate the devastation and hold on to hope, however fragile it might be. It was a day that began like many others, cautiously rationing our supplies and checking our small cash, but it quickly turned into a nightmare I would never forget. We were venturing to a nearby building rumored to have leftover food when an explosion tore through the street ahead. I barely had time to shield Lukas before a chunk of masonry struck my shoulder, sending a sharp, searing pain through my body. I gasped, but held him tighter, feeling the tremor of fear in his small frame. The world narrowed to the sound of my own heartbeat and the cries of nearby civilians. Dust and smoke filled my lungs, and my vision blurred from the impact. I instinctively dropped to the ground, curling around Lukas to protect him from falling debris. My hands shook as I assessed the wound, grateful that my nursing skills honed in the hospital long before the siege gave me the tools to improvise treatment. I tore a strip of cloth from my sleeve, pressing it to my shoulder to staunch the bleeding, all the while whispering calm reassurances to Lukas, though I struggled to maintain calm in my own mind. The streets were chaos incarnate. Shouts of alarm, the pounding of boots, and the intermittent crack of rifle fire created a cacophony that would have paralyzed anyone less determined. But I had no choice. Each second required quick thinking, moving us to cover behind a collapsed wall, shielding Lukas from stray debris, and calculating every step to avoid further injury. The pain in my shoulder was constant, but the knowledge that Lukas depended entirely on me pushed me forward. Once we reached a relative refuge hidden behind a pile of rubble, I tended more carefully to my wound and wrapped it securely. Lukas, ever resilient, clung to me, asking questions in his quiet, curious way, oblivious to the full scope of danger we had narrowly escaped. I smiled through the ache, proud of his bravery, but painfully aware of how fragile life had become. That day crystallized a stark truth. Survival was not just about evading death, it was about confronting it head on while keeping the vulnerable safe. The city had thrown its first true test at us, and though we were battered, bruised, and exhausted, we had endured. I realized then that the coming days would demand more than courage. They would require ingenuity, vigilance, and a ferocious commitment to keep Lukas alive no matter what horrors the war might bring. After weeks of enduring the relentless bombardment, witnessing death and destruction on a scale I could hardly comprehend, my perception of the war began to shift. I had entered Stalingrad, believing in duty, survival, and the hope that life could persist amidst chaos. Yet, the city had stripped away any illusions. The war was no longer a distant conflict between armies. It had become a force that devoured lives, indiscriminately destroying families, neighborhoods, and innocents alike. I watched children stumble through streets littered with rubble, their small hands reaching for nothing, their eyes wide with terror and confusion. Neighbors I had known for years vanished, leaving behind empty apartments and shattered homes. The nurses I had worked alongside, some of them, young enough to be my own siblings, were gone, either killed, wounded, or evacuated. Every life lost was a stark reminder that this conflict was not about honor or strategy. It was about survival in its rawest, most merciless form. I began to question the morality of our choices, the nature of human cruelty, and even my own instincts for self-preservation. Each time I ventured outside to gather food or seek supplies, I faced a cruel calculus to help. A stranger might mean jeopardizing Lukas's safety, yet ignoring suffering felt impossible. The war blurred the lines between right and wrong, leaving only the immediate necessity to survive. Yet, amidst the horror clarity emerged, I realized that my purpose was singular: to protect Lukas at all cost. Beyond that, the war has shown me the resilience of the human spirit, the quiet bravery of those who carried on despite unimaginable fear, the fleeting acts of kindness that pierced through the chaos. My hope for a better world had been replaced by a determination to endure, to act, and to protect life wherever I could, even when surrounded by devastation. By the end of those early weeks, I no longer viewed the war as a distant historical event. It was a living, breathing entity that demanded constant vigilance. I understood that survival meant more than evading death. It meant confronting the moral and emotional toll of violence, making impossible decisions, and forging a path forward for the sake of those I loved most. In that crucible, my understanding of courage, humanity, and sacrifice had been irrevocably transformed. The basement had become our world. What had once been a storage area for old furniture and forgotten supplies was now a refuge from the relentless bombardment above. Each day blurred into the next, measured not by sunlight or clocks, but by the distant rumble of artillery and the occasional crack of rifle fire echoing through the city streets. Lukas and I lived in this confined space. Our movements limited our senses, tuned to the smallest change in sound or vibration. Inside, the air was damp and musty, carrying the scent of dust, mold, and fear. I had arranged what little we had: blankets, a few cans of food, bottles of water, into a semblance of order, a fragile attempt to create normalcy in a world turned upside down. Lukas would sit close, drawing pictures on scraps of paper or play quiet games I invented to distract him from the horrors outside. I watched him carefully, noting the way he flinched at sudden noises, the way his small hands trembled as he clutched mine. Sleep was a rare commodity. The distant thud of falling shells, the echo of screams, and the intermittent roar of tanks kept us alert, our bodies tense and ready to react at a moment's notice. Every creak of the building or shifting of debris reminded me that danger was never far. I often found myself counting the minutes between explosions, timing our breaths, listening for signs that we could safely move to the corner of the basement with more protection. In these long hours, I reflected on the fragility of life. The war had stripped the city of its vitality, leaving only survival instincts and raw fear. Yet even in this oppressive darkness, small sparks of hope persisted. Lukas would smile at a joke, laugh at a silly story, or ask about the future with innocent curiosity. Those moments were precious reminders that, despite the devastation, life continued and my purpose remained clear. I learned to ration not just food and water, but energy and emotion. I had to remain strong for Lukas to shield him from despair and to maintain vigilance. Each day in the basement was a lesson in endurance, patience, and ingenuity, a crucible shaping both of us. And though the city above continued to crumble inside this small sanctuary, I cultivated a quiet determination we would survive and we would emerge from this darkness together. The silence of the basement was shattered one afternoon by a sudden violent crash. A shell had exploded dangerously close to our building, sending tremors through the walls and rattling the few items we had carefully arranged. Lukas yelped, clinging to me, and I instinctively pressed him against my chest as dust and debris rained down around us. The blast had opened cracks in the walls, exposing us to the faint light and chaos of the street above. As I peered cautiously through a small opening, I saw movement soldiers patrolling the ruins, their boots crunching over broken glass and rubble. My heart pounded as I assessed the situation. There was no time to hide entirely. I had to move Lukas to a safer corner of the basement where the structure was reinforced and the risk of falling debris minimal. Each step required careful calculation. One wrong move could expose us to gunfire or falling masonry. The minutes stretched unbearably. Outside the city seemed alive with menace, distant explosions, shouts, and the sporadic crack of rifle fire created a terrifying rhythm. Inside, Lukas pressed his face against my shoulder, whispering questions I could barely answer. I had to maintain composure to remain calm, despite the fear gnawing at me. My hands were steady as I guided him, whispering instructions to crouch low and move silently, while my mind raced through contingency plans should the soldiers detect us. When the immediate danger passed, I allowed myself a brief moment to breathe, checking that Lukas was unharmed. The incident left us shaken, dust-covered, but alive. I reinforced our corner further, using what little furniture and debris I could move, creating a stronger barrier against the chaos outside. I realized that the world above was no longer predictable. It was a place where danger lurked in every shadow, and where survival demanded constant vigilance, ingenuity, and courage. That evening, as Lukas slept in my arms, I reflected on the day's ordeal. The basement had shielded us physically, but the psychological toll was immense. Each encounter with death, each brush with soldiers or explosions strengthened my resolve. I understood more clearly than ever that our survival depended not only on caution and skill, but on an unwavering determination to endure, to protect, and to navigate the horrors of war with every resource our minds and bodies could muster. Days bled into nights with little distinction, and the scarcity of food and water became an ever-pressing concern. Lukas had grown thin, his small body weakened by the limited meals I could scavenge. A cough had begun to linger in the evenings, a reminder that illness in these conditions could be deadly. I felt the crushing weight of responsibility pressing down on me. I had to make choices that no parent should ever face. One morning, after discovering that our supplies had dwindled further than I realized, I had to decide whether to risk venturing out into the streets once more. The path was dangerous. Snipers, soldiers, and collapsing buildings were constant threats, but staying meant starvation and perhaps illness for Lukas. My mind raced as I weighed the dangers. Each option carried potential death, yet inaction was equally perilous. I sat with Lukas on the basement floor, trying to explain in the gentlest terms why we might have to leave the safety of our small sanctuary. He looked at me with trusting eyes, unaware of the full gravity of our situation, and my heart ached. I promised him that we would be careful, that I would protect him no matter what. His small hand in mine became an anchor, a reminder of why every decision mattered. The moment crystallized the relentless calculus of survival. I realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. I had to navigate this labyrinth of rubble, smoke, and gunfire, balancing instinct with calculation, hope with caution. Each choice carried profound consequences, yet there was no alternative but to act. That night, after preparing a minimal ration and plotting the safest route through the city, I lay awake listening to the distant rumble of artillery. Fear, doubt, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, yet a quiet determination burned within. The war had stripped life to its barest essentials: survival, protection, and resilience. And though the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with peril, I knew that we would face it together. Every trial endured, every choice made would shape our journey, and in that understanding, I found the resolve to continue no matter the cost. Weeks of constant bombardment, scarcity, and fear had begun to take their toll on me in ways I had not fully anticipated. My body was weary from sleepless nights spent listening for the distant roar of artillery, and my mind had grown frayed from the relentless vigilance required to keep Lukas safe. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of movement outside our fragile walls sent a jolt of anxiety through me, leaving me exhausted yet unable to rest fully. The psychological weight of survival was heavier than any physical burden. I found myself flinching at the slightest sound, my heart racing even in the relative calm of the basement. Nightmares haunted my sleep, vivid images of explosions collapsing, buildings and faces of neighbors lost forever. Lukas's quiet questions during the day, innocent as they were sometimes, pierced me with guilt, reminded me that he sensed more than I could admit. I realized that my fear was not just for myself, but an endless worry for his safety, and the two were inseparable. Each day demanded that I suppress panic-forced calm into my voice and mask my trembling hands as I guided him through the debris-strewn streets or tended to his needs. Yet beneath the surface, the tension coiled tighter and tighter, leaving me drained, anxious, and perpetually alert. Despite the mental fatigue, a quiet, stubborn determination persisted. I knew that succumbing to despair would be fatal not only for me, but for Lukas. I clung to the idea that each cautious step, each careful decision, was an act of defiance against the chaos surrounding us. My exhaustion was immense, but my resolve to protect my son was stronger. In the midst of fear, hunger, and relentless uncertainty, I discovered that psychological endurance was as vital as physical survival, and that the mind, like the body, had to be trained to withstand the unrelenting storm of war. The physical toll of survival in a city under siege became impossible to ignore. My shoulder, wounded during the early bombardments, never fully healed. Each movement reminded me of that day, the sharp pain flaring whenever I lifted Lukas or reached for supplies. Bruises and minor cuts from falling debris covered my arms and legs, and the constant strain of carrying him through streets strewn with rubble left my muscles perpetually sore and fatigued. Lack of adequate nutrition compounded the injuries. Meals were scarce and irregular, often consisting of a few scraps of bread, canned goods, or what could be scavenged from abandoned buildings. My body weakened, energy draining faster with each passing day, and even small tasks like hauling water or climbing stairs felt monumental. Sleep was fitful at best, interrupted by distant shelling or the cries of civilians echoing through the streets. Despite the pain and exhaustion, I could not afford to slow down. Lukas relied on me entirely, his safety depended on my strength and vigilance. Each bruise, every ache was a reminder that I had to find ways to compensate, to push my body beyond limits I had never imagined, and to improvise methods of care. I learned to brace myself against walls, distribute weight carefully when lifting him, and use splints fashioned from broken furniture to stabilize my injuries when necessary. Even as my body protested, I refused to succumb to weakness. Survival demanded endurance, creativity, and the ability to function under conditions that would break most people. Every step outside, every trip to gather food or water required careful planning and physical resilience. The war had transformed my body into a tool of survival, shaping it through pain, fatigue, and necessity just as it was shaping my mind. I realized that endurance was not just mental or emotional, it was physical too, and that my ability to keep moving, to keep Lukas safe, and to adapt to the daily hardships of siege life was inseparable from my very will to survive. By the time our food supplies had dwindled to near nothing, I was faced with a decision that no parent should ever have to make. The streets outside were treacherous, littered with rubble and patrolled intermittently by soldiers whose intentions were unpredictable. Yet staying inside meant that Lukas and I would risk starvation. Each choice carried profound danger, and each path seemed to hold its own form of peril. I weighed the options carefully. Venturing farther into the city increased the likelihood of encountering gunfire or stray shells, but it also offered the chance to gather much-needed provisions. Remaining in the basement might keep us physically safe for a short while, but slowly, hunger and dehydration would weaken us, making us vulnerable to disease and exhaustion. The calculus was brutal, and I felt the sharp edge of fear and responsibility cutting deep into my conscience. Finally, I resolved to take the risk. I mapped out the safest route I could using alleyways and ruined buildings for cover and prepared a small pack with what few supplies we had left. Every step had to be deliberate. Lukas, sensing my tension, asked quiet questions about our journey. I answered as honestly as I could without revealing the full danger, knowing that my composure was as crucial to our survival as the path I had chosen. The journey itself became a test of both strategy and endurance. I had to constantly assess the terrain, anticipate danger, and decide when to move quickly or pause. At one point, we encountered a small group of civilians scavenging near a ruined market. I debated briefly whether to share our limited rations or keep them for Lukas. The moral dilemma weighed heavily, but ultimately I chose survival, first guiding Lukas past the group and continuing toward our goal. Returning to our apartment with whatever food we could find, I realized that this was not a one-time decision, but a pattern we would have to repeat constantly. The war demanded strategic compromises, difficult choices, and sacrifices that went against every instinct I had as a mother. Yet, with each calculated risk, I grew more attuned to the demands of survival learning, to balance morality, caution, and necessity in a world where the rules of safety no longer applied. The stakes were always high, but my commitment to Lukas remained absolute. After weeks of improvising and reacting to immediate dangers, I realized that survival required more than constant vigilance and short-term decisions. The city was changing faster than I could keep up, and the lessons I had learned from each trip outside, each close call, each scavenged ration began to coalesce into a broader understanding. To protect Lukas and endure the siege, I needed a new approach, a strategy that extended beyond the next hour or the next day. I began seeking connections with other survivors. A few families had found refuge in nearby buildings, sharing whispered plans and pooling scarce resources. I approached them cautiously, offering help in exchange for information about safer routes and abandoned supplies. Trust was fragile, but collaboration became a necessary tool for survival. With their guidance, I could anticipate shelling patterns, avoid patrol streets, and locate hidden caches of food. This shift in approach also meant accepting calculated risks I had previously avoided. I started organizing small excursions into the more stable parts of the city, not merely scavenging, but also mapping safe passage and storing hidden reserves. Lukas accompanied me whenever possible, and I used these experiences to teach him basic awareness, how to stay quiet, where to hide, and how to recognize danger. It was exhausting, but essential, transforming both of us into active participants in our survival. I also adapted our living space, reinforcing walls, creating hidden compartments for supplies, and establishing multiple exits in case of bombardment. Each adjustment was a small step toward long-term endurance, a recognition that our existence could not rely solely on chance. I began to see our daily routines not as mere acts of survival, but as part of a structured plan to endure the siege, protect Lukas, and maintain hope. By the end of this period, a subtle but profound change had occurred. I was no longer simply reacting to events. I was anticipating them, learning to maneuver through danger with foresight and balancing immediate needs with long-term strategy. The transformation was born of necessity, but it gave me a sense of control amidst the chaos. Survival had become a mission, and every action, every decision was a deliberate step toward ensuring that Lukas and I would continue to live even in a city consumed by war. Amidst the rubble and the lingering smoke of Stalingrad, I found moments, fleeting fragile, when I could reflect on the meaning of what we had endured. The war had stripped away the illusions of safety and normalcy, exposing the raw essence of human vulnerability. I began to understand in a profound way the value of peace, not as an abstract ideal, but as the simple daily blessing of a life unthreatened by bombs, bullets, and fear. Every silent street, every preserved corner of our apartment became a testament to the fragility of that peace and the magnitude of what had been lost. In these quiet reflections, I also felt the weight of responsibility, not just to Lukas, whose life and future depended entirely on me, but to the memory of those we had lost. Friends, neighbors, and strangers alike had perished or suffered unimaginable hardships, and I carried them in my heart as a constant reminder of the stakes. This responsibility shaped every choice, every journey into the city, every rationed meal, and every calculated risk. It was not enough to survive. I had to survive with awareness, with intention, and with a respect for the human lives around me. I realized that survival was inseparable from moral vigilance. The choices I made were not only about preserving life, but about honoring the humanity that the war threatened to erase. Small acts, sharing information, quietly assisting other survivors, teaching Lukas empathy and caution became my own way of asserting dignity and continuity amidst the chaos. Even in despair, hope persisted. I envisioned a future where war would be a memory rather than a daily reality, where children could play without fear and where simple kindness could be restored to a city that had forgotten it. These reflections strengthened my resolve, reminding me that our endurance was not merely about survival in the moment, but about the values we carried forward. By the time the day ended, as Lukas slept beside me and the distant echoes of artillery softened, I understood that our journey was as much about maintaining humanity as it was about enduring danger. War had tested every facet of my being, but it had also illuminated the importance of peace, compassion, and responsibility. And in that understanding, I found a fragile but unyielding sense of purpose that would guide us through the days still to come. The distant echoes of artillery had finally faded, replaced by an uneasy silence that blanketed the city. Stalingrad, once a thriving hub of life and industry, now lay in ruins. As I stepped out of our makeshift refuge, Lukas clinging to my hand, the full weight of what we had survived hit me. Buildings were reduced to skeletal frames, streets were littered with debris, and the remnants of lives abruptly ended lay scattered like forgotten memories. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to feel the relief that we had endured when so many others had not. The fear that had gripped us for months seemed to loosen, replaced by a profound exhaustion and the quiet, fragile comfort of survival. Yet the devastation around me tempered any joy. Every collapsed roof, every silent doorway was a testament to the enormous cost of this war. Walking through the shattered streets, I became acutely aware of the delicate balance between life and death that had carried us to this point. Each step was a reminder of the choices made, the risks taken, and the sheer stubbornness required to keep Lukas safe. The city was unrecognizable, but in our survival, there was a small, undeniable victory. We had endured the unimaginable, emerging from the shadows of destruction with our lives intact, though forever marked by the trials we had faced. Amidst the ruins, I held Lukas close, realizing that while the war had taken much, it had also revealed a resilience I never knew. I possessed a determination that would guide us in the uncertain days to come. The war's end did not bring immediate peace. My body bore the marks of relentless strain. My shoulders still ached from the blast, muscles were perpetually sore, and exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. Malnutrition had left its imprint, and even months later, my strength was diminished. Each movement reminded me of the cost of survival, and caring for Lukas required every ounce of energy I had left. Psychologically, the siege had carved deep channels of fear and vigilance into my mind. Nightmares haunted my sleep, filled with the sounds of explosions and the faces of those lost. Every sudden noise or flicker of shadow triggered the familiar tension of months spent in constant alert. The joy of survival was tempered by an ever-present awareness of the fragility of life, and the memories of destruction lingered like ghosts impossible to ignore. Yet, even amidst this lingering trauma, a quiet determination persisted. Lukas's presence grounded me, reminding me of why endurance mattered beyond the mere act of surviving. I understood that the physical and psychological scars I carried were inseparable from our story of resilience. They were reminders of what had been lost, the price of survival, and the depth of human endurance. Though the city around us was scarred and though I was forever changed, I found in the shadows of suffering a sense of purpose to heal, to protect Lukas, and to rebuild, carrying forward the lessons of courage, adaptability, and the profound importance of life itself. Standing amidst the ruins of Stalingrad, I felt the weight of what we had endured and the lessons that survival had carved into my soul. War had a way of stripping life down to its most essential truths: the fragility of peace, the unpredictability of fate, and the immense cost borne by those who were never soldiers yet bore the heaviest burdens. I understood now more than ever that peace is not merely the absence of war, but a treasure that must be safeguarded with vigilance, empathy, and a profound respect for life. I reflected on the sacrifices of countless individuals, neighbors, friends, strangers who had given their lives or endured unimaginable suffering. Their stories etched into the rubble around me became a silent testament to courage and endurance. I carried their memory as both a burden and a guide, a reminder that survival was intertwined with responsibility. Responsibility to the living, to the innocent, and to the legacy of those who could not continue. For Lukas, this responsibility was immediate and visceral. Every choice I had made, every risk taken was to secure his life and future. Yet I also understood that my experiences granted me a duty beyond him alone. I had witnessed the devastation wrought by hatred and conflict, and I felt compelled to instill in him an appreciation for compassion, empathy, and the preciousness of peace. As I looked toward the future, I realized that the lessons of Stalingrad would remain with me forever. Survival was not enough. Understanding reflection and commitment to a world where such destruction could be prevented became equally vital. In the midst of devastation, I discovered that human responsibility, compassion, and the yearning for peace were the forces that could truly endure long after the echoes of war had faded. As the days turned into weeks after the siege, Lukas and I began the slow, fragile work of rebuilding our lives. The city remained scarred streets lined with rubble and memories of those lost. Yet, amidst the destruction, I could feel the pulse of resilience, the quiet determination of survivors who, like us, refused to let the war define the entirety of their existence. Walking through what remained of our neighborhood, I held Lucas's hand tightly, feeling both the weight of the past and the tentative hope of the future. Each step reminded me that life, though battered, persisted. The experiences we had endured would remain with us forever, etched into our bodies, minds, and hearts. But within those memories also lay lessons of endurance, courage, and the irreplaceable value of human connection. I understood now that our story was not only about survival, it was about the responsibility to remember to honor those who had been lost and to carry forward the principles of compassion and empathy. The war had taught me that peace was a gift fragile yet essential, and that protecting it was a duty that extended beyond my own family. As I looked at Lukas, his small face illuminated with curiosity and innocence, I felt a quiet resolve. We would rebuild, we would nurture hope, and we would ensure that the future held more light than shadow. The city around us was broken, but we were alive, and with life came the chance to shape it with care, wisdom, and love. And so, amidst the ruins, I held on to the enduring truth, though war leaves scars that never fully faded, also reveals the resilience of the human spirit. From the ashes, we can choose to rise to hope and to remember carrying forward a legacy that honors both those we lost and the life that remains.